I mean, you know she's a little heavy. When you fire her up, look at reverse. Well, you can tell right away it sounds like a garbage truck's about to back up. Come on, girl. Come on, girl. Hey guys, it's Joe. Yes, I know this doesn't exactly look like the winter wonderland you're used to seeing with snowmobiling, but we are in Pittsburgh, and we had kind of an important video that we wanted to get out. Didn't want to wait till we got back to the snow, which we're heading here in a couple of weeks. Really in this kind of video, if you will. And I do think this is probably going to be one of the most important ones that we do for the entire year. We're going to go ahead and give an early verdict on both of these machines on which one we think you should buy coming into 2023. We know that Skidoo has already released kind of their models and their run-up for 2023. We know the Polaris is going to release it next week. We kind of want to get you information ahead of time as to which sled we would buy, which sled we think you should buy. We also want to give you an update of what we've been up to the past couple of weeks, as well as, believe it or not, one or two kind of product reviews, which is something we don't generally do because we're not exactly sponsored by any particular products. That being said, over the past couple of weeks, we were very fortunate that right prior to Valentine's Day, Mike and I were able to participate in the Snowball Cancer 500 miles ridden in a day charity event, where the proceeds go obviously to fight cancer, for cancer research, and for families who have suffered with loved ones suffering from cancer. It was a really neat event. This year was hosted out of Bergland, Michigan. We were able to participate and kind of go with our group and our team. And really, it's as fast as you can get done safely, 500 miles in a day. And if you can imagine, you know, I'm kind of blessed that I have both of these sleds, and I have both of these sleds on purpose. I had the VR1, obviously, from last year. And I wanted to get the best, the latest and greatest that Skidoo had to offer with this Mach Z in terms of a trail sled to see how they stacked up. And it wasn't an easy decision to figure out which one of these sleds that we would go with, or that I would go with the ride. Obviously, Mike has his own VR1. Now, really, when I was thinking about it, the benefits of the VR1 are, one, it handles exceptionally well, turns are no problem whatsoever. I'm very familiar with the machine. And also, with the display with the map, I can see at all points in time where my fellow rider is, where Mike is. I can see exactly where he is on the map, how far away he is from me, and I can adjust my speed back and forth depending on how close he is or far away from me during the day. That being said, this sled here now has close to 7,500 miles. At the time of the ride, I was really nervous about would this VR1 keep it together or not. I mean, listen, it's a 500-mile charity ride. If you don't complete it, you don't get the charity money. Between Mike, myself, and a third guy named Todd, we were able to raise over $9,000 for the charity, which was phenomenal. The Skidoo, there's many reasons to go with the Skidoo. It's first off, it's reliable. I would depend on this motor to get me through a nuclear fallout. I know that it would make it from point to point, no problem whatsoever. But it was lacking in the map area, and it's still lacking in the map area. The map does not work necessarily. I mean, the map works fine, but without your phone and having connectivity, it's missing some features, as well as it wasn't connected to the other VR1 sled. In addition, I knew that this sled would have some problems going through the turns. All that doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, my fears about the VR1 and its reliability actually weighed out true. And my decision then for which one of these sleds that I was going to take on this 500-mile ride was decided for me. And that we ended up taking both of these sleds on a 500-mile ride, because Mike's sled that has roughly 7,500 miles, actually its motor, the top end of the motor went. It looks like one of the gaskets went, or the bolts in the cylinder stretched, but it started leaking coolant, and it was time to do that top end anyhow. So that ended up going to the dealer, and for Mike to ride the charity event, I gave him my VR1, which was great then, because we have good feedback then from this ride on what we liked between these two sleds. A couple of things I mentioned about the charity ride. It was a really exciting event. It was a great success. It is not a race, right? It's not designed to be a race. But tell any snowmobiler that something is not a race and see how fast you can get down 500 miles. We're going to make it a race. That's what we do. We left at exactly 4:38 in the morning of the ride. I believe it was on the 10th. And we were able to get done at exactly 5:08 into the parking lot in Bergland, at the Bergland Motel, at exactly 500.4 miles. And those of you who have a calculator will note that that is precisely, all in all told, 40 miles per hour average on the nose, even including stops, fuel stops, everything. And we didn't do any lake riding. We were on a single lake. We actually went and took actual trails, actually go and show our route here. It was really, really exciting. I think we might have been the only ones that didn't cross the lake during that entire event. But really to make it through on these sleds, on both of these sleds, without an issue whatsoever. And for those of you who don't know, Todd actually rode a Yamaha. He made it through as well with only one small issue, which was blowing a belt, but that's okay. That's going to happen from time to time. Something else I want to note about this charity event. Before the charity event, obviously we reached out to a number of people to donate, which was great. We got great, all between our friends and family, everyone gave a lot of money. But I also reached out to some certain potential sponsors for the event. And look, I wasn't looking for money for those sponsors. I was just curious to see what they were going to do. To be honest, I reached out to Skidoo. I also reached out to Polaris. And from both of those companies, I didn't really hear much. I did hear a bit from our local dealer, but that was okay. I also reached out, I'm not afraid to say it, I reached out to Woody's and said ultimately, hey, we run your skags anyhow, we run your products. I'm going to buy them anyhow, but if you want to contribute, I'm sure I'm going to tear up a pair of skags during this ride. Didn't hear anything from Woody's. Matter of fact, we reached out to a number of companies. And I'm proud to say this, it's really interesting to me. There are a number of lovers and haters of this company, and I will say this, no matter what you feel about the company, the only one that actually reached out to us and did something is this company right here, AMSOIL. AMSOIL actually responded relatively quickly and said, hey, we think this is great what you guys are doing for charity. How can we help? We let them know that we may be riding these two-strokes. They said, fine, let's get some Interceptor coming your way. So we absolutely put the Interceptor in and burned it toward a charity ride. They also sent out this really cool product that we got to do a showcase on. And I am going to say we did get this for free. They want us to go ahead and try this Mudslinger product. It says it repels mud and dirt. And to me, it's kind of a silicone type spray, if you will. And it looks like it's made for what would be dirt bikes, quads, side-by-sides, off-road trucks. But here I think they got the right idea of expanding this into a snow market, because honestly, early season, late season, we end up going through a number of mud holes. The stuff gets all over your sled. The silicone spray was pretty slick. It was easier than putting on some sort of wax on your sled. Spray it on, wipe it off. It was slick as could be. It looked beautiful. And then the dirt just kind of did wipe off at the end. This is a fantastic product, by the way. And we're going to continue to use this. Now, so far, so good on this Mudslinger product. Anyhow, I know there's a lot of people who love or hate AMSOIL. And obviously, AMSOIL makes everything from brake fluid, which I actually really do like. I haven't tried their chain case oil yet. I'm going to in the future. They make two-stroke oil, which is Interceptor, which is what we've used in these machines. Obviously, not this one. They do also make four-stroke oil. So for me, my experience has been relatively good with AMSOIL. I understand that there were some product changes over the past number of years. Wasn't around for those, can't speak to them. All I can talk about is my experience. And the only thing I can say is they actually did step up and contribute to the charity, which is pretty darn impressive. Thank you for that, AMSOIL. All in all, it was a very successful trip. As I said, we all made it through a very, really good time. Matter of fact, when we compare that to our normal times, when Mike and I are on our VR1s and we're riding solo and we're not going 500 miles, our average all-in miles per hour is about what I would call 41, sometimes 42. That's usually our clip. We don't stop for long lunches. We will stop and eat from time to time. Obviously, we have to put fuel and we have to put oil in this thing. And in the prior days leading up to that, I actually wanted to get used to this Mach Z. So 2 days prior, actually 3 days prior to the event, the first day we put on 340 miles. I did it solely on this Mach Z. The next day we did 370 miles. And the third day we had to drive over to the event, and I was really sad to only be able to put on about 90 additional miles before the event. And of course, afterwards, I put on a number of miles on this as well. All in, there's about 1,670 miles on this Mach Z. Most of them, except for just a couple of yard miles, were from that trip. Then we had another 75 or so miles on a rental sled. We were helping some guys out, so it was a heck of a trip. In thinking through a comparison of both these machines, we really wanted to kind of give the all-inclusive look at these. And last year, with this VR1, we were pretty tough on the old girl. I mean, every little small problem that popped up, we were reporting on. And there were numerous small problems, don't get me wrong. But to mention, on this Mach Z, we've also had a couple of problems to begin with. I mean, honestly, this front kind of windscreen here is vibrating around quite a bit when you're running and sitting at idle. And I've taken and put some foam, and I'll show a better picture of it here in a second. I've taken some of this foam and I've stuck it up underneath the dash, and it's kind of helped out quite a bit but for a machine as expensive as this is, to have this mid-screen kind of shaking around and making a bunch of noise is a little bit annoying, especially when you pull up to somebody and you're sitting next to them and it's shaking away. The second thing that we found on this Mach Z is that the tail light wasn't working whatsoever. Very, very, very fortunate, because in taking a look on how I was going to fix it, there's a number of rivets I was going to have to drill out to get that light. I was going to try to pop it out, but I didn't want to break the plastic. Ultimately, I was able to wedge it up enough, and lo and behold, it was actually lined up the connector, and all I had to do was squeeze and pop it in. And something else I want to mention about this Mach Z, and it really did surprise me, is the belt wear that I've already have on this machine after just this first little ride. Mind you, it was 1,650 plus miles, but you take a look at this belt at 1,650 miles versus this VR1 that's sitting at 4,000 miles, and I can tell you, I feel from the condition of it that this belt is already in worse shape on this Mach Z. That being said, it doesn't feel like it's engaging weird or anything with the clutch. Everything feels normal, and I was actually surprised to see that. Oh, and by the way, in case that everyone accuses me of over launching this thing or being in launch mode too much, I've decided so far that I'm not going to launch this machine and see how far I can go without launching it. So this is not launch mode damage whatsoever. This is just normal ride and normal wear and tear that's on this machine. And talking about maintenance overall, and I think that should be our first category to discuss. I've really been going back and forth in my mind between these machines. Obviously, you have an oil change that's going to happen on this, a 4-stroke machine, every 4,000 miles. That oil change kit was about $85 US dollars, and it took, I don't know, let's call it 40 minutes to do, maybe 30 minutes to do. It's my first time getting through it. That being said, this machine here, every 4,000 miles, you have to go through and clean the exhaust valves. Yes, I know it says you don't have to do it, they're self-cleaning, but believe you me, on these VR1s and these 850 motors, these Patriots, and the 800s for that matter, and I would imagine the 650s and 600s, you have to clean those exhaust valves every 4,000 miles or so to maintain this thing in optimal performance. From there, you can say, okay, well, this has spark plugs you want to change every so often. I would say about every 2,000 miles. But over here, you're going to change them every 4,000 to 6,000 miles anyhow. Chain case oil is about the same. I would say that I really like the fact that the Mach Z has a drain plug, the chain case oil. That is nice to get every little bit out of it. However, I will say that it actually did take extra time to find that drain plug, get it out. It's a really weird size. It's like a 4.5 millimeter. I actually think I used a 3/16 American or Imperial size to knock it out of there. Anyhow, you get that out, you drain it, obviously you have a fill, and then a check level plug. So there's actually 3 plugs you take out: the fill, the check level, and then obviously the drain, and put it all back together. Do I feel that it got more items out of the chain case? Absolutely. We're on the Polaris. It's really quick only because I have the right tools. I have the hand pump, you pump up, it's a suction pump. It pulls out all that, evacuates all of that, I shouldn't even say all, most of that chain case oil, and then refill it. That's something that should be done every 4,000 miles. Candidly, we do them on these VR1s every single time we come in because it's really cheap insurance. From there, there's something interesting at 6,000 miles. It's in some sort of turbo exhaust gasket that needs to get replaced. And I think every 2,000 miles, you have to make sure you torque the header bolts. And that's really not that complicated to do. Back on this side of the equation, obviously you have a top end that you have to worry about that can come in between anywhere between 7,500 and call it 10,000 miles. We're still experimenting, finding out where that's going to be. And that top end, really, if you catch it early enough, and oh, by the way, we've been monitoring the compression on this motor at close to 75 or 7,400 miles. It still is at 148 to 150 psi. So this motor is still in pretty darn good shape. But that's going to come in eventually. And if you catch it soon enough, that top end is going to cost you about $600. If it goes into the bottom end, that's when it gets a little bit more expensive. In thinking about both of these motors, I expected that motor is going to go 20,000 miles. I honestly do. And so that's probably 3 top ends and a bottom end on this versus that 1 top end. But once you get into the top end, between the head work, what potentially is turbo work, there's a little bit more electronics that go along with that. I'm here to say on the motor rebuilds, it probably is going to end up being the same since top ends of these are relatively inexpensive to replace. They're really nothing to these motors whatsoever. In terms of scags, that machine, the Mach Z, I have the outer skag set up with the inner runners. So I have twice as many skags, but it appears that they wore about half as much. So I think the skags are going to be about the same price versus this as a single runner. I think that the tracks are going to be about the same. The bogey wheels are going to be about the same. There is something to be said though. So overall, when you go through the maintenance, I think it's going to be 6 one, half dozen the other. I'm not overly ever worried or concerned about the maintenance that happens on this 2-stroke. I do get upset, obviously, when you get to 7,500 miles and you start to really monitor that motor. I expect this Mach Z to go a very, very long time. And look, whether you want to do an oil change or you want to do exhaust valve cleaning, that's up to you. But I really can't say that the maintenance is more difficult on one versus the other. And I think that overall maintenance costs are very, very, very similar. However, there is something to be said about running costs. It's actually a huge difference. Last year, you guys will note that I did a little bit of a test on fuel mileage on this VR1, and I got a little bit of hate, a little bit of shade on it. But the reality is that we were getting anywhere between 10 to 15 miles per gallon on this VR1, and we were getting about 90 miles per quart of oil, of two-stroke oil. On the Mach Z, I was really nervous because this has 11.5 gallon tank. We think effective 11 gallons. On the Mach Z, it had 9.5 gallons, and I thought to myself, holy heck, I better buy the fuel tank, and I absolutely did because I was worried about fuel economy. The reality is, on that sled, after it broke in, I was able to see 13 to 14 miles per gallon, which was amazing. Matter of fact, when we were on a bit of a ride, we were coming in to get gasoline, and this machine here, this VR1, ran out of gas literally 70 feet from the pump, and that thing kept on going, and that has a smaller tank. So to begin with, you don't have any oil consumption. Second off, it gets better fuel mileage, which is amazing. They both use 91 octane, so there's no benefit there necessarily. And on the oil consumption, how much is that? Well, when we kind of figured in 1,750 miles or 1,650 to 1,750 miles at 90 kind of miles per quart and $12 per quart, which is pretty cheap if you can get it for that. It was about $235 US dollars that we spent in oil over the week on this machine versus over here in the Skidoo, as well as the fuel savings. So without a doubt, there's a fuel savings. You can't dispute that whatsoever. But in terms of maintenance, I wouldn't say that one's any better or worse than the other. They both have decent warranties on them. They both have really easy access to items. Obviously, the belts you can see here by taking off the side panel. One thing I will note is on the brakes. Obviously, there's a side cover you have to take off to inspect the brakes. And from there, I'm not sure if you can compress the calipers back, but on a Polaris, it's really easy. You pull off the side skirt here, you can see the brakes, and you can even pull a pin and pull them out by hand. It's a really good setup. How often does that happen? I mean, honestly, for anybody, it's above 5,000 miles. For us, we're going through brakes every 4,500 to 5,000 miles. So overall, maintenance, not a tough thing. Obviously, running costs and expense. This guy here, Mach Z, takes the cake. I know. All day long snowmobile. We love to sit at the bar at the evening. We talk about the performance and how awesome these machines are. And the reality is, I just spoke about maintenance first and a little bit running costs, or about running costs. And what I'll mention here next is, let's talk about comfort. Because the reality is, you're going to be in the saddle for a good portion of your day if you're actually out there riding. I know some guys are going from stop to stop or point to point in the woods, but these are trail sleds and they're designed to go ahead and go actually, big distance between stops. We go town to town. We enjoy doing, kind of 350 a day. And that's kind of a normal day for us. So you're in the saddle for a long time, and whether it's 100 miles or whether it's 350 miles for that day or even a 500-mile charity ride, comfort does really matter on these sleds. The very first thing that I noticed is you have excellent wind protection on the Mach Z. Not to say the VR1 was bad, but if that was good, this Mach Z is absolutely great. Where I felt myself actually getting warmer than I normally would, had to unzip my jacket, open up the vents, let some of the heat out, because this windscreen gets that wind up over top of you. Matter of fact, it even knocks it up over top of someone like me, the very top part of my helmet. So even when we were snowing, I was able to kind of get in here a little bit close, and the snow was blowing right up over top of my helmet, keeping me from having to wipe my visor constantly. These hand guards I mentioned before, you can't do a mid-screen hand guards on the VR1 because they bump and they rub and they touch. On the Mach Z, they work fantastic. As I mentioned about comfort, and this was something we predicted all along the way, this seat on the Mach Z is super comfortable. I absolutely love it. And the reality is, I find myself on a VR1 standing up a lot more. You're shifted over to the side, kind of getting yourself on one cheek on a long day. It's interesting, if you get on one cheek, it's a little bit more bearable than actually taking it right at the center. You guys know what I'm talking about. On this one here, I just kind of sat in the center. I chilled, I relaxed, I rode. It was phenomenal. The suspension on this machine, is top notch. It is second to none. I sincerely mean that. I thought the Polaris VR1 had great suspension, but it is lacking, and I'll tell you where it's lacking in a second. This semi-adaptive suspension that's on this Mach Z, really, as soon as I started getting used to it and noticing that I couldn't bottom suspension out, I was really trying. I'd find some, kind of square-shaped bump, and I'd go right for it, attack it, and I couldn't G out the suspension. And I know that in 2023, there are going to be a number of models that have this active suspension. I need to tell you, if you're a trail rider and any sled you get that active suspension upgrade. There's no doubt about it. It is better than the VR1. It made an incredible plush ride, and where the VR1 suffers is this. It is set up for a particular type of riding, or you set it up for a particular type of riding, ultimately how you're going to ride the machine, and when conditions change, then you run into an issue. And really, to set that machine up well, to go pretty fast in corners on trails, it's a relatively soft setting in the front end and the rear ends. I say relatively soft, which that means the compression is going to be able to compress easier. That gives you a little bit more compliance, but the rebound you cannot change on that machine, and it really upsets me because if you get in the stutter bumps in a corner, if it's not rebounding fast enough, you'll skip off the trail. And if you get the stutter bumps that are too fast, going forward, you start to get pow up. But when you have this softer setting on this machine, which has worked on the VR1, then all of a sudden, if you do hit a bump that gets a G out or a bottoming out, it bottoms out and then bucks that machine, which is very, very, very dangerous. This machine here, the Mach Z, it adapts, I think I read 37 times it reads per second for the compression and 50 times per second on the rebound, and you absolutely feel it. You put this thing in sport mode, which is excellent as is, or comfort mode, which is fine, you can cruise along the trails. Neither one are too terrible going along the trails. You put it in Sport Plus, and what I think that does is that then allows that rebound to come back much faster, and I think it increases the rate of the compression. So I tried all three modes. I think Sport was actually pretty good, but I wanted to dial up my speed a little bit. I knew things were going to get a little more technical in the bumps. I put it in Sport Plus. I am very, very satisfied with the suspension on this, and nothing against the VR1. It's just not as technical as this is by any stretch of the imagination. The number one thing I liked about it wasn't just that it was more comfortable, but it was safer for sure. And for those of you who have hit that surprise bump and it's bottom your suspension and it's bucked you in the air, you'll know what that's like. And this one here, I hit a couple of those bumps by surprise. Then I started finding them on purpose and hitting them as hard as I could. It did not buck. We only were able to bottom this machine one time, and we tried really, really hard to do it. And the entire, 1,750 miles. This guy over here, we were bottoming at least once per day, and the bump that this did bottom on, it sent this machine, this VR1, flying, and I was on it. I was following Mike. This went down and finally bottomed, but Mike went right over it. I bottomed and launched in the air and came down. Fortunately, everything was fine, but it was a little bit hairy scary there for a second. So this machine, hands down, is a more comfortable machine. What I found myself doing is, because this machine is more of a sit-in type of machine, the VR1 is more of a sit-on type of machine. It's a different type of feeling. I would say that the one place that this truly, truly shines, except for everything I just mentioned, is at high speeds. At high speeds, when you're over 90, the VR1 to me feels a little bit sketchy because you're up on top of the machine. Nothing against the VR1, it's the way that it rides. This you sit down in a little bit and it feels more planted. Between 90 and 105 miles an hour, this thing feels just absolutely planted. The one place where the Polaris shines and is a much more comfortable machine is when you get into the turns and you're seesawing back and forth, and they're really, really, really tight turns. Where over here, you're yoking this back and forth. The steering is a little bit harsher, a little bit tighter, a little bit harder to turn than the VR1. Obviously, it's a lighter machine, but where you start to get wore out on the Mach Z in tight turns, the VR1 you have for days. With the Mach Z, if you're riding at 85 to 90% through those tight turns, the VR1, you are riding at simply 65 to 70%. That's all there is to it. So we'll come to that in a second on handling, but overall for comfort, there's no doubt about it, this Mach Z has it in spades. In terms of usability, I would be absolutely remiss if I didn't begin by mentioning the Polaris PIDD. Obviously over here on the Skidoo, and it's being upgraded for this next year to a larger, I think 10.25-inch screen. But the setup and the format of that screen is going to be almost exactly the same for 2022 as it is going to be 2023. This Polaris screen is amazing, and it's been amazing since it came out. Obviously you have this giant map on there, which is wonderful to see. You hardly ever get lost because of it. You can see where your other riders are, and you can't import rides, etc. And it's not dependent on your cell phone for any feature whatsoever. Where over on the Skidoo, the Mach Z is dependent on your cell phone. You're running an app in the background. And where that was a bit of a problem is, to begin with, you have to kind of be very careful on your setup because it's really finicky and gets upset. You start up the Polaris, you turn it on, you fire it up, that machine boots up, the screen's booting up. If you decide to go ahead and ride off and the screen hasn't finished booting yet, it will finish boot. And I would say 99 out of 100 times, it comes up and away you go and you can see your riders and everything's great. And now 1 out of 100 times, you go ahead and reboot it one more time and away you go. Although most of the time we've seen that it works without flaws, without issues whatsoever. On the Skidoo, you start the machine, and to begin with, to get it set up, it has to boot up. It has to go ahead and link to your phone via Bluetooth. Which, by the way, if you have a headset, a lot of times that's also trying to compete to link with your phone. Sometimes Skidoo wins, sometimes your phone wins. But to begin with, Skidoo has to link up with your phone via Bluetooth. So then Skidoo on the machine has to link up to your headset, and it does that. It also is simultaneously linking into a USB cable. Now, if that USB cable is slightly off, it doesn't like it. I even noticed with my iPhone, it didn't like an aftermarket cable. I had to have an iPhone cable. It did like that. So once you have this all set up and everything looks good, then all of a sudden on the Mach Z, you can toggle through your music, which is great. And you can see the app that goes ahead and shows where your maps are and pull up one of your planned rides, which works really well, all the way until you lose cell phone service. And once you lose cell phone service, it loses its ability to kind of calculate how far you are away from the stops. It loses its ability to know where you are in the ride. It doesn't know if you're back at the beginning of the ride and you want to start over again. It just gets lost. The maps still do work, but it's just not as clean as using, obviously, the Polaris setup. As well with the Polaris, and I haven't been able to figure out how to do this on the Mach Z. On the Polaris, you kind of have it where you rotate around and it's always north as the top of the screen. Where on the Mach Z, the whole screen is rotating around. I couldn't figure out how to change it. Maybe someone can show me in the comments how to do it. But often I come up to a stop then and get lost. I couldn't figure out if I was supposed to go right or left because I may have a trail that goes this way and looped around and it tied off each other. So I can see a trail, but am I supposed to come on and go this way or go this way where we were doing maybe kind of a figure eight? And I get confused for a second. It was kind of embarrassing after never getting lost on this VR1. What I also mentioned about usability is this. I did complain about the controls in the VR1. I'm still complaining about the controls in the VR1. I absolutely love them on the Mach Z. They're very clear, they're very intuitive. And I thought that I wouldn't like this little jog dial. I got used to a jog dial. I like the jog dial. It was great having that down there. A separate function for anything that doesn't have to do with the machine necessarily. It's just kind of the entertainment system, if you will, the music, the maps. It was all on that jog in a way I want. It was really easy, very intuitive. And I know for 2023, they're putting it all up here on that switch gear up here because there are a number of complaints. But candidly, I think people complained about it before even they got a chance to try it because I actually do like it. The next thing I'll mention is lights. And look, there's a lot of people out there who have complained for years about Polaris lights, and I'm one of them as well, headlights at night. And the VR1 did a little bit better with, I think they call this the Night Blade or whatever this fancy thing is called for it. But I will say this Skidoo's light is absolutely terrible. And it's a good thing that it's terrible, by the way, because when we left for our charity ride, it was snowing. We had 8 inches that fell overnight, and it was snowing like a blizzard. And thank goodness that low beam was so low because it wasn't then reflecting snow back in my face. I mean, look, we could only honestly go about 40 to 50 miles an hour in the morning. That being said, it was snowing so bad, it's kind of embarrassing to say, it was snowing so bad that I lost the 2 guys behind me in the morning on our way out. So they couldn't see my lights. Obviously my tail light went out, they couldn't see that either. I couldn't see them on the map. Obviously we're trying to get done as much trail as possible. And in the end we figured we'd just go ahead and rendezvous at the next point, which was going to be Greenland. We're going to go and pick up a belt for Todd's machine. And so I just started heading that way, and I was going without really hurting myself or killing myself. And obviously the VR1 was able to catch right up because it could see better than I could, and eventually found my trail and caught right up to me. So look, kind of livability is, the reality is that the VR1 for lights and for the gauge, those are 2 big pluses right out the gate. What I do generally like about the Skidoo, and this is generally in terms of livability, is that you have this awesome setup. They have this link system. And I would say overall for the past couple of years, I've been a tremendous Link fan. Matter of fact, the old Axis chassis, I switched over with an adapter kit to run Link accessories. But on this last ride, unfortunately with this Mach Z, I lost the bag. Yeah, it's actually true, I lost the link bag. And what happened was the screws that inside that hold that link bag down, they were loose. That bag was bobbing up and down, and eventually it broke off the portion of the shaft where the link locks in. It broke that out. The bag went flying, and thank goodness I wasn't the last rider, because the next rider coming along obviously picked up my bag. When I got to the next point where I turned around to make sure everyone was fine, which was some miles down the road, I was looking, but once I see the headlights, I keep going. Obviously, I turned around and noticed my bag wasn't there, which you rarely check with Link. I looked around and checked and started backtracking and thinking to myself, oh my gosh, there goes all my stuff. So on this one here, I have to give a little bit of a thumbs down to the Link system. The Link system overall is good. My suspicion is that bag came from the dealer. Those nuts inside, or sorry, those screws inside weren't tight to begin with. And because of that, they eventually got fully loose. That banged around, broke the rest of the Link system, and it came off, and away it went. And this Polaris system, I've actually been relatively surprised with. I thought that by now we'd have broken this thing off. It hasn't broken. We've got nearly 7,500 miles on this, going through all kinds of bumps and everything else, and it's been pretty darn solid. I know that on the Polaris you can put multiple accessories, and look, they have their fuel tanks as well and multiple things. I love the Link system. It's stackable, it's multi-configurable. You know, we kind of joke about this thing. You can bedazzle your machine however you like with Skidoo. You sure can. You can put knee pads, you can put all kinds of stuff on the back. And look, we've had multiple configurations on this, and it's great when you have other people coming along with you. Maybe someone that doesn't have a Polaris bag, as an example, you can put an extra bag on the back for them on the Skidoo system. So overall, I'm happy with it. Just on this particular ride, I finally broke one, so it has to get a thumbs down. In terms of other storage on these machines, you have nice storage underneath this Polaris. It's great. I actually put a toolkit underneath there, which is a great joke from Skidoo, guys. I know 100%. Put as many tools as you possibly can because it's a Polaris. I get it. I love the joke. But in the back of the Skidoo, it's not great for putting tools. We think it's a great handy place to stick extra two-stroke oil so you can bring along for your Polaris buddies. So we'll carry the tools for you. Don't worry about that, Mach Z. We got you covered in case you break down. Of course, you guys can carry the extra oil for us. The one thing I am disappointed in is that the storage inside these glove boxes is a considerable difference. Since you do have this dry bag that you have for your phone inside of the Mach Z, it does limit a little bit of your storage, where inside of the VR1 I feel you have a little bit more storage. That being said, there's a really cool thing that's inside of the Mach Z, which is a way to charge your phone. So it's like, yeah, your phone's plugged in, you have to use it running things, but you're able to charge it all along the way. So in terms of overall livability, in terms of how you're going to get on the machine, how you're going to get on the trail, really poor on lights. Shame on you for the Link system actually breaking, Mach Z. Shame on you. Excellent screen on this Polaris, no doubt about it. The bag hasn't broken off so far. I can't complain about it. The switch gear is excellent on the Mach Z. What can I say? So until you've actually tried one of these maps on these Polaris, you don't know how much of a game changer it is. And yes, I know for 2023 they're making a bigger screen, but it is a bigger version of what's there today, which is okay. It's pretty good, but it's just not as good as the Polaris. There's nothing else to say about it. So let's mention a couple more things about handling. And as we're getting into that, I guess we'll talk a bit about ergonomics. So the ergos on both sleds are fairly good. I did just mention about how the Skidoo feels like you're riding in it, where the VR1 feels like you're riding on it. If you don't know what that means, try both sleds and trust me, you'll feel this thing, you feel like you're down in a little bit better. And that's a good feeling. You get used to it, and I've actually gotten used to that from other Skidoos. The Polaris, you feel like you're up on top of it. You can really attack turns in that machine. Not to say that this is bad, but you can get it just a little bit better on that VR1. The other thing is that VR1, it does have a slightly skinnier seat. I mentioned that in the other video. And ergonomics are pretty darn good. One place I was entirely wrong with my prediction on this Mach Z was that my knees would get banged up on these plastics, as they did in prior Skidoo generations. And I will tell you on this, it wasn't an issue whatsoever. So to jump into more about handling, I would say that handling is obviously a combination of steering, suspension, getting around the turns, and really being able to attack those corners and those turns as fast as possible. I can't deny this. The VR1 is a better handling machine. First off, the steering is lighter, there's no doubt about that. You're not worried about really kind of have to power this thing through the woods. It's just really, really easy to flick the bars back and forth, and where you point the bars, it goes. So this machine here, this Mach Z, I had set up for essentially relatively packed trails, because that's what I expected to see. That means I had the suspension set up for relatively packed trails, although you can adapt it along the way. Look, you can change the overall ride height and the suspension characteristics, and then this is kind of then doing your tuning on how that adaptive part works. But I had it set up, and by the way, the majority of our trails were that kind of packed, not entirely firm, mostly firm trails with some ice underneath them. It happens from time to time. And so coming into a turn, I really liked the way that this felt, and that you had a little bit, just the slightest bit of float in that front end. And for those of you who understand what that means, is that if you don't have float, you're catching and hooking skis all the time and pulling a ski up, yanking a ski up here and there. If you got just a little bit of front end understeer, you can actually carve around a turn very, very quickly. And if you're coming into a turn, you're not quite going to make it, you can just give a little bit more, a little bit of additional steering, and you'll make it around that turn. And I love setting up a machine that way. This VR1 was that way from right out the box. We did some suspension tuning. We got it right where we wanted it. We never lost that capability of having either a direct bite or just a little bit of understeer in our front end. That thing has been rock solid. Where this Mach Z fell on its face was when the twisties got real tight. You felt you were yoking this thing back and forth quite a bit, or even worse, when we got fresh powder. When we got fresh powder coming into a turn, the front end was just straight out washing out. And I experienced this before on prior generation Skidoo chassis, which is you have a little bit of washout in the front. You can quickly correct it by tapping the brake, but once you do that, you go from understeer to oversteer, and it can be a little bit hairy scary. On this machine here, thank goodness, tapping the brake never did kind of evoke that oversteer. It did correct the understeer. But what I find myself doing in the sleds, quite simply, is you end up going into a turn not as fast. That way you're not worried about in the middle of the turn, am I going to make it or not. You're going in a turn, you know it's going to understeer, you let it understeer, you back off the speed, you come out of the thing, and you go. And then you find yourself then working back and forth the bars quite a bit more, and then on the straights actually increasing your speed more to try to keep up with your buddy. We went into a, I would say not complicated, but a more technical section of the trail here from, essentially, goes from Champion over to Gwin in Michigan. And we love these trails. It's 32-33. There's a lot of turns and twisties. North of there, north of Champion, you go up to the trail system we call Dark and Twisty. Also amazing trails. They're very, very technical. And I would say that it is, one of the three main reasons that we go ahead and snowmobile. We love trails like this. No, they're not 20-mile-an-hour trails where you're, constantly bobbing back and forth. They're actually anywhere between, 30 and 80 back and forth with the tight turns that back up the speed, tight turns back up the speed. Well, I went through on this Mach Z, and I was working pretty darn hard. And Mike went through on the VR1, and he wasn't working hard at all. I got to the end of that, myself and the guy in the Yamaha, and I was nearly exhausted. I mean, it was tough after 2 hours of going through that. But the VR1 came through, and Mike just kind of shrugged his shoulders and said, oh, no problem whatsoever. So we knew right then and there that that was really the downfall of this Mach Z. And look, you can't go against physics. I'm not going to deny that. It was rather tough to do. So I'm not going to go ahead and say that the Mach Z handles terribly, because it doesn't. Because the reality is, if you're riding at 75% of your capabilities, or 70% of this VR1's capabilities, you'll never notice. You're going to have to work a little bit harder on the Mach Z, but look, whenever that VR1 decides to step it up and take off, there's not much you can do about it. One other thing I'll mention, I did say earlier that I felt myself sitting down more in the Mach Z and was much more comfortable, and that is true. Whenever I did stand up and get after the bumps on this, and I always stand up on the VR1, whenever I stood up and got after the bumps on this, man, I could really tear through those bumps. There's no doubt about it. This suspension is really phenomenal. So anyhow, I hate to say it, but there's certain places where the Mach Z is not going to outshine the VR1, and flat out, handling is one place where you cannot beat this VR1. It can't be undersold. Oh, by the way, I'm actually not that satisfied that I'm doing this sitting out here in a parking lot. The reality is, Mike and I went ahead and got some really good video, and I'm going to go ahead and show the voiceover of that. The reality is, the GoPro video froze in the middle of the video taking, where it only recorded sound and not video. I know what you guys are thinking. Polaris must have purchased GoPro along the way. No. This is 100% on GoPro. This has nothing to do with Polaris. I can't even blame the VR1 on this one. But the video froze, and it really makes me sad, because we got some excellent video, or had some excellent video. At least I got the voiceover here of Mike's impressions that I'll share with you at the end. I would say overall fit and finish is going to be just a bit of a wash between these two machines. Honestly, Polaris had lagged Skidoo for so many years until this VR1 came along. They've done such a good job on this machine relative to where Skidoo was. And so we were pretty impressed last year with where this VR1 was or ended up becoming. Where the Skidoo, look, I expect a lot out of Skidoo for fit and finish, but little things like these vibrations just kind of make me bonkers and crazy. Like, why does that even exist? But it's okay, because overall the fit and finish is still very, very nice on this. The quality of the build is excellent. I think it's great. I think it's actually similar to the Polaris. And so, look, aside from some of the component issues that we've had last year with the Polaris, the actual fit and finish and the engineering of putting it together, I think, is pretty darn good. Matter of fact, I think the engineering is good on both of these machines. It's just a matter of what vendors that they choose for those parts and where their quality control is for those parts. But overall, I think I said a wash on fit and finish between these two machines. What I will mention is a big difference is speed. So speed is a category that is important for many of us. And I will mention that acceleration, when you get this machine to hook up, this Mach Z, there's no doubt about it, it is pull your arms out of the socket fast. It is, I also thought that the VR1 was pretty darn fast. The VR1 is 850. I feel like that motor is somewhat detuned from where it could be. The reason I say that is that the 800, I think, was a high-strung rocket ship, and this 850 seems to be more reliable, as we've seen in terms of mileage on those top ends, and it's just not as much of a thoroughbred, you know, a crazy thoroughbred, if you will, as that 800 was. It's pretty linear, it's relatively tame, it's still pretty darn fast and has some pretty good top end, and you would think, wow, top speed on that thing is unbelievable until you got on this Mach Z, because top speed on this is absolutely incredible. Matter of fact, at the end of our last ride, we were filling up, and Mike came to me and he said, hey man, I didn't want to tell you this, but it feels to me like your top end of your VR1 is gone, man. I said, yeah, it feels a little bit flat to me as well. We'll do a compression test when we get back. Lo and behold, we did a compression test, and guess what? It actually worked out completely fine. And here the problem was, we had spent time on this Mach Z, and when you're up over, you know, kind of 90, 93, 94 miles an hour, this thing is pulling still pretty darn hard. Or I used to think that that's still pulling pretty hard, and it does relative to other machines. This thing just keeps on going. So if top speed is your thing and getting there really fast is your thing, you cannot beat this turbo or other turbo sleds. The other thing I'll mention about speed is this. If you are looking to do consistently over 85, 90 miles an hour, and that's where your kind of sweet spot is, and you're running from, you know, spot to spot doing those speeds, there's no doubt about it, Mike and I both felt more comfortable at speed, at high speed, with the Mach Z. It's not that the VR1's sketchy or an issue whatsoever, but you are riding on top of the machine, and it doesn't feel as sorted and planted, probably because of the suspension, as this Mach Z does. So if all day long I was going above even say 80 miles an hour, between 80 and 100 or 105 miles an hour, and that's where my speed was the majority of the time I was on the sled, there's no doubt about it, I would pick this Mach Z. I wouldn't even consider the VR1. If, and this is talking about speed by the way, if speed through turns is important to you and not just on the top end, not sweeping turns, these both do great in sweeping turns, but speed in turns where you're coming in really fast, you're going from, call it 65, 70 on a trail, down to 30, back to 70, back to 30, back and forth, then obviously the VR1 is going to be a better machine because of how it handles turns at speed and the little effort that it takes to get into it. So speed is one of those things. I don't know what speed you're going all day long, and I don't know what speed the majority of your trail riding is, but if it's going to be top speed and top acceleration, no doubt about it, you got to get on this Mach Z. It was entirely accidental that Woody's didn't respond, that's a shame, to our request for Skags. I even sent them an email and said, hey look, I'm going to buy your Skags anyhow, it'd be kind of cool if you wanted to get a bit of a mention. I guess they did get a mention for our after charity ride. And it was entirely by accident that when I came through the dealership and we dropped off Mike's sled for its cylinder issue, that I needed to pick up a set of Skags versus ordering them in. And they did not have any Woody Skags there, but they did have these Stud Boy shaper bars. And so we stuck these Stud Boys on this Polaris, and I will tell you, I am very, very, very impressed. I hadn't tried different Skags on this from new besides Woody's. Obviously it's what comes from factory. It's easy to get that replacement part. You order them, you get them in, away you go. Obviously, we run these with the navigators, and I think that this thing handled even more on rails. It dug in really, really nice. It wasn't too much. The carbides, I don't think, wore nearly as quickly. It's still looking in great shape. We're going to go ahead and run it another ride. Usually we're swapping out skegs after every single ride. It's good to go for another ride for sure. I don't feel that it dug in too much where you're picking skis all the time. I felt it was an excellent, excellent carbide, and we're going to go ahead and try it again and keep going on this one. So thank you for that, Stud Boy, by accident. Really, really appreciate that. We're going to go ahead and give it another shot here, and we'll try something else here around the corner for sure. Speaking of sponsors, aside from running through all that two-stroke oil on these machines, and by the way, we never were sponsored by anything like Amazon or otherwise, and we don't have any money from any sponsors anyhow, Mike and I always, aside from burning up so much money on two-stroke oil, always hoped that one day we would get sponsored, at least by KBC. Because good golly, Miss Molly, it is some delicious beer to have at the end of snowmobiling. I'd open this beer up and make a sound, but that would just maybe make me look like a sellout. Anyhow, KBC, we're still hoping someday you will sponsor us and consider us. Until then, we're going to keep promoting you anyhow. All right, what's your impression?
The suspension is absolutely incredible.
Did you G out on that big bump?
I did. Finally, took me a lot of work today, and yesterday I hadn't bottomed it until right now. I know that you did, for sure.
I G'd out and launched in the air.
Yeah, and I went over it. The suspension is so good on this machine. Candidly, you can ride it like an asshole. You can power into things that you would normally shy away from with this machine, but it'll make up for your mistakes, and that is also kind of dangerous too. So the suspension is absolutely incredible. The stance on this machine is not bad. It feels more narrow than it looks initially. Yeah, I think overall the steering is super heavy. Very heavy front end. It pushes a lot and it turns. In those woods, I know you weren't barely even trying to keep up with me. And I was working, sweating like crazy. Overall, nice sled, but still gotta be this one.
Well, let's swap them out, see what happens.
Okay, just hopped off the VR1. A little bit of a different trail, but the steering is so much better. The handling of this sled, it can't be undersold. This thing, there's a separation between you and the trail. It doesn't feel as responsive. It's definitely more comfortable to ride this, but you really look at this machine and you feel where it's going. You feel everything on the trail. It's a lot more darty. It's got predictability in the turns. This thing is, you know what it's like. It's a washout machine. So handling way better.
What do you think?